I'm delighted to share this moment of congratulations to the Hungarian Foreign Ministry, to Ambassador Kounalakis, and of course to Central European University for hosting this very timely and important conference. Timely because there are issues at stake today that I think relate to the subject of the conference, which is the relationship of the U.S. Diplomatic Corps and the Hungarian Diplomatic Corps. And it's also important because at this moment in time, we have to reassure our European friends that the United States is very much involved in Europe. We're committed to Europe. We've not gone away. And this conference, I think, reinforces the notion that we have many issues and history and values in common. First of all, let me set the context for my talk this morning on what the Hungarian reaction to NATO and its desire to join NATO was based upon. Hungary had suffered the vicissitudes of 2 world wars and, of course, 45 or 50 years of communist domination. But notwithstanding all of that, or perhaps because we have very fine professionals on both sides of the Atlantic, our relations with Hungary at the diplomatic level were never terribly out of kilter. We managed to have conversations and dialogue between us during the worst of times as well as the best of times. So in 1994, on my arrival to Hungary, several things were taking place that involved our foreign relations and our desires to help Hungary in its evolution from a Warsaw Pact country to a contributing member of NATO. Why did Hungary want to join NATO? There are 2 really basic reasons. The first, obviously, is a security reason. Having been protected, in quotes, by the Warsaw Pact for 45 years, the Hungarians were also concerned about their security going forward once they were no longer part of a Warsaw Pact. It was important to them to know that there were people, there were countries, there were military forces that could come to their aid in case of problems. But secondly, and I think equally important, the Hungarians realized that membership in NATO was not just a military alliance, but rather a joining of you might say, a club of countries with mutual goals and mutual standards. For example, freedom of the press, a parliamentary system of government, free elections, civilian control of the military. All of these things were very, very important to the United States and to its other NATO allies, and became obvious to the Hungarians that if they wished to join NATO, they too had to observe these conditions and these standards. So joining NATO was an exercise both in military upgrading and in conforming to Western European standards. From the point of view of the United States, having Hungary as well as its neighbors, the Czech Republic and Poland, join NATO was equally important because, as President Clinton said, we were desirous of a Europe that was whole, free, and at peace. And as long as there was no peace south of Hungary in the former Yugoslav Republic, conditions were not ideal. They were certainly not what NATO was there for or what NATO intended to see. Hungary had been troubled by the events in Serbia, Bosnia, and Croatia. There had been an overspilling of some military activity in borders. There were Hungarian ethnic minorities in all 3 countries, so that the situation, from the Hungarian point of view, was not a happy one. It was a very fraught one. As the great Hungarian president at the time, Arpad Gánc, observed, Hungary is obliged to live in a very dangerous neighborhood. And it was a dangerous neighborhood. So early on in 1994 and late 1994, I realized in talking to my Hungarian counterparts, particularly Prime Minister Horn and Foreign Minister Kovács, that the Hungarians were unhappy or frustrated by the irresolution of the United States when it came to intervening in the problems in Bosnia and Croatia and Serbia. Early in October 1995, the then Hungarian ambassador to NATO, András Simonyi, said in a meeting in Budapest that he already had indicated to his colleagues and to us in Hungary that the Hungarians might, in principle, be prepared to play some role in peacekeeping or establishing peace in Bosnia if NATO and the United States intended to go there. This was a very good signal. It didn't commit Hungary to anything, but it gave us a clue as to what Hungarian intentions might be. And that proved to be, his advice proved to be very valuable, because by early November 1995, after the commencement of the Dayton peace talks, it was clear that in one form or another, the United States was going to intervene in Bosnia, either to keep the peace or to establish the peace. It wasn't clear which yet. The Dayton Accords had not been agreed to. But early in November 1995, I received a visit from then General Crouch, who was the Commander-in-Chief of U.S. forces in Europe, which really meant the most important military official dealing with European NATO forces. He came to see me along with a retinue of his officers to ask whether Hungary might, if asked, be prepared to be assistance in staging a peacekeeping operation in Bosnia. The American military and NATO had not yet decided on where they would want to stage a base for intervention in Bosnia, but they had the feeling that Hungary might be the right place to do it. Crouch asked me whether this would be of importance to the United States, whether I could sound out Washington as to whether or not Washington would be helpful. I said, General Crouch, I don't have to wait a few weeks to give you an answer. Just consider it done. So that was a great relief to the American military and to NATO. And shortly thereafter, as the Dayton agreements were signed, the American military and NATO began to gear up for intervention in Bosnia. The first meetings took place in a town called Kapusvar and at an air base, a former Soviet air base called Tasar. It was near the Bosnian border, had a long airstrip, a railhead, and very good roads. It turned out to be the ideal spot for the staging of the Bosnian peacekeeping intervention by NATO. In the course of about a month, after visits by a number of American military personnel and diplomatic personnel, a base in Tasar was up and running. In about 30 days, a base which had been deserted by the Soviets in 1991 as they left Hungary now became the staging area for our Bosnian intervention and peacekeeping campaign. And in the course of over a month, just over a month, over 25,000 NATO troops transferred through Tasavar to Bosnia, 25,000, plus a permanent party detail of about 3,000 forces in Tasar to handle these movements. More than 200,000 tons of equipment was shipped in the course of a couple of months, mostly from Germany, through Hungary into Bosnia, and 100 tanks and more than 150 aircraft were established at the Tasar base. It was a remarkable military achievement, and it led to what I consider to be the high point of my career as ambassador to Hungary, when I was asked to send a message to Washington recommending that we ask the Hungarians to permit us to establish this base, and I received I sent the following cable to our colleagues in Washington, to the President, prior to the American base being established. The cable read as follows: following consultations with the leaders of the 6 parliamentary parties in the morning of November 27th, this was just after Thanksgiving, the Parliamentary Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee met in an exceptional combined session on November 27th. The 2 committees approved the text of a parliamentary resolution authorizing Hungary to provide support for IFOR, the NATO involvement. This resolution was then passed by the entire Parliament on the evening of November 28th by a vote of 312 in favor, 1 against, and 6 abstentions. The resolution provides for the transit and temporary stationing of IFOR forces, along with their equipment and supplies, as well as the use of Hungarian airspace. This was a remarkable action on the part of the Hungarian government and the Hungarian Foreign Ministry to achieve a parliamentary resolution on 2 days' notice, a resolution that served them well and served us equally well, because Hungary provided a great assistance in Tasar, and subsequently it helped pave the way for membership in NATO. While this was going on, this is a final point, the Hungarians were also, with our help, negotiating with both Romania and Slovakia over the condition of ethnic Hungarians living in those 2 countries. They'd been there in many, many cases since the Trianon Treaty of 1919. There were over 2 million ethnic Hungarians in Romania and about 600,000 in Slovakia. Our intervention and our help, along with some of our NATO colleagues, in getting the Hungarians, Romanians, and Slovakians to agree on mutually acceptable terms for the treatment of the Hungarian ethnic populations, also served the Hungarians very, very well, so that when it came time in 1996 to offer an invitation to Hungary to join NATO, they'd established their credentials both through their enormous help in the Bosnian intervention and through their acceptance of the fact that the only way to settle the Romanian and Slovakian ethnic questions was through peaceful dialogue. The lesson from all of this, I think, is very clear. One, the United States must remain an important European neighbor. We cannot exit from Europe. We have to be there, and our presence is extremely important. Secondly, the use of diplomacy without military power or military power without diplomacy are equally useless. Both must complement one another. And in the case of our Bosnian and intervention, military power was the force that made the diplomatic power work so successfully. And finally, for today's Hungary, I think it's important to recognize the fact that the Hungarian people in 1996 and 1995, for the first time in over several hundred years, decided their own fate without being forced to do so by an outside power. Irrespective of party affiliation, irrespective of whether they were left or right, country or city, the Hungarian people joined together to effect a very, very useful and important transformation into a NATO member. This is a lesson that I think that applies as well today. The Hungarians can speak for themselves, but they should speak for their country in working closely as an important member of the European community and of NATO.